In the quiet English town of Hexham, near Newcastle, something happened in 1957 that defied logic and would shake beliefs about life, death, and the soul. On May 5th, two young sisters, Joanna and Jacqueline Robertson, were struck and killed by a car while walking to Sunday church. 18 months later, their grieving parents, John and Florence, gave birth to twin girls, an event that marked the beginning of one of the most chilling and well-documented cases in paranormal history. From infancy, the twins began showing inexplicable signs that they were somehow connected to their deceased sisters. They spoke of things they had no way of knowing, bore identical birthmarks and scars, and vividly described the accident that had killed Joanna and Jacqueline. Their memories and behaviors were so precise, so disturbingly familiar, that scientists couldn't dismiss them. For 2 decades, researchers from the University of Virginia, including the esteemed Dr. Ian Stevenson, investigated the case, ultimately publishing peer-reviewed studies that continue to unsettle scientific communities to this day. The Robertson family had always been deeply rooted in faith. John, a Catholic convert, ran a humble milk delivery and grocery business, with Florence, a former Salvation Army member. They were raising 6 children in a home centered on discipline, prayer, and love. Joanna, at 11, was mature and nurturing, especially towards 6-year-old Jacqueline, who followed her everywhere. The girls were inseparable. Jacqueline had a distinct scar on her forehead from a fall and a small birthmark above her left hip. Tiny details that would later take on eerie significance. Each Sunday, the family walked together to church. The girls cherished these walks, full of laughter and plans for the day. On that fateful May morning, Joanna wore her favorite blue dress, and Jacqueline picked a yellow one she felt made her look grown up. They were joined by their friend, Anthony Ledden. At 10:15 a.m., the three set off on the familiar route. But at 10:27, tragedy struck. Marjorie Wynne, a mentally unstable local woman, drove her car onto the sidewalk under the influence of barbiturates, intentionally hitting the children. Joanna died instantly. Jacqueline passed en route to the hospital. Anthony succumbed to his injuries hours later. The town was shattered. First responders arrived to a scene of chaos and bloodshed, the girls' brightly colored dresses torn and soaked in red. The shock rippled through the community, silencing a town that had never seen such horror. For John and Florence, it was a grief beyond comprehension. Florence collapsed at the news. John, silent and broken, clung to his faith and to a belief he had long held in secret reincarnation. He had been fascinated by the idea since childhood, quietly praying not only for salvation, but for proof that souls could return. Florence, rooted in traditional doctrine, had always resisted the idea until her newborn daughters began proving it might be real. This isn't folklore or superstition. It's a case investigated at the highest academic levels, led by one of the most respected psychiatrists of the 20th century. The evidence gathered continues to baffle and disturb, forcing even skeptics to ask the unthinkable. What if death isn't the end? What if sometimes the soul finds its way back? Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and tell us what state you're listening from. This story is only just beginning. 2 small white coffins rested side by side, buried beneath a sea of flowers, while the sound of muffled sobs echoed through every corner of the church. The Robertson family had been broken in a way that seemed beyond repair. In the days that followed, Florence withdrew completely, barely speaking or eating. The house, once filled with the laughter of children, now felt like a mausoleum. Their toys remained untouched, their beds unmade since that final Sunday morning, their clothes hanging like ghostly reminders in the closet. But while Florence grieved in silence, John turned to prayer with a desperation that unsettled her. Each night she found him in the girls' bedroom, whispering not prayers for peace, but pleas for their return. As the months dragged on, the household struggled to navigate a future built on absence. Florence stopped attending church entirely, unable to reconcile her faith with the cruelty of their loss. John kept going, but his prayers grew more urgent, more unorthodox. His obsession began to alarm both Florence and their priest. Then, 8 months after the tragedy, Florence discovered she was pregnant. What should have brought hope instead ignited conflict. Florence saw the baby as a blessing, a path toward healing. John, however, became convinced of something far more unsettling, that their daughters were coming back, not metaphorically, but literally. He believed without doubt that Florence was carrying twins, and that those twins were Joanna and Jacqueline reborn. "They're coming back to us," he whispered at night. "I can feel them." Florence was horrified. As a devout Catholic, she saw her husband's belief as heresy. Reincarnation was not only unchristian, it was blasphemous. She begged him to stop fearing for both his mental health and spiritual well-being. But John's conviction only deepened. He claimed he could feel their presence in the house, especially in their old bedroom, and would sit there for hours talking to them, as though they had never left. Medically, the pregnancy appeared normal. Dr. Margaret Thornton, Florence's physician, conducted routine exams and consistently found only one heartbeat. All evidence pointed to a single baby. But John wouldn't be swayed. "There will be two," he insisted, even when faced with medical facts. "My daughters are returning together, just as they left." The strain became unbearable. Florence confided in friends that she was considering leaving him. The word twins was enough to reduce her to tears. As her due date neared, her anxiety spiraled not just over childbirth, but over what would happen if John was wrong. Or terrifyingly, if he was right. Labor began in the early hours of October 4th, 1958, exactly 18 months after the deaths of Joanna and Jacqueline. Florence was rushed to the hospital. Dr. Thornton prepared for a routine single birth. Nothing could have prepared her or anyone for what happened next. At 3:47 a.m., Florence delivered a healthy baby girl. Dark-haired, alert eyes wide with uncanny focus. Then, unexpectedly, a second round of contractions. At 4:12 a.m., another baby girl was born. Identical. Dr. Thornton was stunned. Despite all her examinations, she had never suspected twins. In over 30 years of practice, she had never seen a twin pregnancy go completely undetected. When John was told, he didn't react with surprise. He simply nodded and said, "Of course there are two. Joanna and Jacqueline have come home." The baby's identical twins were named Jillian and Jennifer. At first glance, they appeared healthy and normal. But as nurses examined them, they made an unsettling discovery. Jennifer bore two distinct markings that Jillian did not. One was a reddish mark on her forehead, just above the right eyebrow, nearly identical to the scar Jacqueline had from a childhood accident. The other was a dark round birthmark on her left side above the hip, in the exact spot where Jacqueline's had been. These discrepancies made no scientific sense. Identical twins should share all physical characteristics. Yet here was Jennifer with marks. Her twin lacked marks that perfectly matched those of a dead sister. Dr. Thornton, puzzled, documented the anomalies in the medical record and even photographed them for further review, something she had never done before. She'd delivered hundreds of twins, but never encountered anything like this. When Florence held her daughters for the first time, her emotions were a whirlwind joy. Fear, disbelief. She had expected a new chapter. What she got felt like a continuation of something far stranger. Joy at the twins' arrival was overshadowed by an eerie sense of unease. Jennifer, the one with the mysterious birthmarks, unsettled Florence in ways she couldn't explain. Her eyes seemed older, more aware than a newborn's should be. John, meanwhile, studied his daughters with an unnerving intensity. examining Jennifer's markings with a gaze that sent chills through his wife. When she asked what he was thinking, he simply smiled and whispered, "Welcome home, Jacqueline." 3 weeks later, the family returned to their quiet house in Hexham. But the homecoming marked not peace, but the beginning of something that would unravel their understanding of reality. For the first year, the twins appeared ordinary. They hit every milestone, giggled, and cried like any other babies. Florence began to hope that maybe John's obsession had been just a manifestation of grief, and their lives might finally return to some kind of normalcy. Then, exactly 18 months after their birth, the same span of time between Joanna and Jacqueline's deaths and the twins' arrival, everything changed. It began on a cold February morning in 1960. Florence was tidying the house while the girls played quietly. Earlier that week, John had retrieved a few old items from the garden storage shed, including some of the girls' old toys items that had been carefully stored away since the accident, never shown to the twins. Without guidance or hesitation, Jillian went straight to a specific porcelain doll with auburn hair and a blue velvet dress, Joanna's cherished birthday gift, chipped on one hand. Cradling it tenderly, Jillian said, "Oh, Margaret, I've missed you so much." Florence froze. An 18-month-old child had just named and embraced the doll in the exact way Joanna had. At the same time, Jennifer found Jacqueline's favorite stuffed rabbit, its left ear torn and frayed from years of love. She pressed it against her cheek and murmured, "Bunny," the precise nickname only Jacqueline had ever used. Florence called for John, her voice shaking. When he saw what was happening, he turned pale, whispering, "You see, I told you they came back." Florence still searched for rational explanations. Maybe the girls had overheard stories. Maybe it was coincidence. But as days passed, the incidents multiplied. The twins began exhibiting behaviors and recalling knowledge they couldn't possibly have acquired. At 2.5 years old, Florence overheard them playing. Jillian said, "Do you remember when we walked to church that Sunday? You wore your yellow dress, the one with the buttons." Jennifer nodded, replying, "I remember. Anthony was with us. He talked about the bicycle he wanted. Every detail was accurate. Anthony had spoken about a bicycle that day. Jacqueline had worn a yellow dress." Then Jennifer added softly, "And then the car came. The lady looked so angry." "Do you remember how much it hurt?" Jillian answered in a whisper. "I remember the blood. There was so much blood. And the screaming." Horrified, Florence burst into the room. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Not sure she wanted an answer. "We were just remembering," Jillian replied simply before we came back. These conversations continued memories of their old bedroom layout, names of schoolmates, and even exact phrases once used by their grandmother. But the most terrifying memories were about their deaths. After nightmares, Florence would find the girls trembling, describing the sound of metal crashing, the pain of impact, and the angry face of the woman behind the wheel. One day, Jennifer, while playing with dolls, said, "When the car hit us, I couldn't breathe. My mouth filled with blood." Jillian touched the birthmark on Jennifer's forehead and whispered, "That's where you hit your head. That's where the mark came from." Florence, deeply disturbed, consulted Dr. Thornton, their longtime family physician. The doctor suggested that children often absorb details from adults without anyone realizing. But even she was puzzled by the depth, accuracy, and emotional weight of the girls' statements. Then came the moment that broke Florence's skepticism. During bath time, Jennifer traced her own birthmark and said without emotion, "This is where I got hurt when I fell on the bucket. It never stopped hurting, even after I died." The story had spread beyond Hexham. Local journalists had already picked it up when in 1963, Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, known for his research on reincarnation, contacted the Robertsons. He had investigated hundreds of children around the world who claimed to remember previous lives. But the Robertson twins were something different, more detailed, more compelling, more disturbing. The twins were 4 years old when Stevenson arrived, the ideal age range he had identified for the strongest past life recall. He conducted physical examinations documenting Jennifer's birthmarks in precise detail, comparing them with old photos and records of Jacqueline's injuries. The results were striking, identical location size, and even behavior. Just like Jacqueline's scar, Jennifer's birthmark deepened in color during cold weather. Stevenson interviewed the Robertsons extensively, charting every incident and observing the twins firsthand. He watched them identify people from their previous lives in photos, people they'd never met in their current one. He noted their violent phobias of cars, their intense panic near traffic, and their terror at the sound of revving engines. But what most fascinated him was their personalities. Jillian showed the same protective motherly instincts as Joanna, while Jennifer mirrored Jacqueline's dependence and vulnerability. Over the next 20 years, Dr. Stevenson continued studying the Robertson family. He documented their case in academic journals and later included it in several books. He considered it one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for reincarnation he had ever encountered. Meanwhile, the twins' experiences only deepened in complexity. The nightmares persisted. Florence took to sleeping in their room, fearing to leave them alone. Their dreams were not vague, they were filled with vivid detail, emotion, and trauma. Jennifer would sob, saying, "The lady looked so angry. She hurt us because her babies were gone. I saw it in her eyes." The fear affected their lives in every way. They resisted cars, screamed near traffic, and clung to each other when forced to travel. But what disturbed Florence most were the whispered reassurances they gave each other, words no living child should know. Once, Jillian held her sister close and said, "Don't worry about the dreams. I know it hurt when we died, but we're safe now. We came back together just like we promised." These weren't fantasies. They were lived experiences rooted in pain, memory, and something far beyond imagination. And as the girls grew, so did the weight of what they carried. Not just echoes of a past life, but the trauma of a death they weren't supposed to remember. The strain between Florence and John only deepened as the twins grew. While John saw every strange detail as further proof of reincarnation, Florence clung to rationality, desperate to believe their daughter's behaviors could be explained by grief, suggestion, or coincidence. Their surviving sons, older brothers to the deceased girls, were caught in a strange, emotional limbo. They had loved Joanna and Jacqueline, and now found echoes of them in Jillian and Jennifer. At times it felt like a miracle, other times like a haunting. The entire family dynamic grew tense, uncertain, and emotionally volatile. As the twins approached their 5th birthday, Dr. Ian Stevenson prepared the Robertsons for what he'd seen in other cases. Most children who reported memories of past lives gradually lost them around this age as their present identities began to solidify. And true to his research, that's exactly what happened. The change was subtle at first. Jillian and Jennifer stopped talking about their past life memories, stopped recognizing places and objects they once claimed to know. The overwhelming fear of cars began to fade, though it never fully disappeared. By the time they turned 6, the girls had no conscious memory of ever saying or doing anything unusual. When asked about the experiences that had so deeply unsettled their family, they looked puzzled, as if those memories belonged to someone else entirely. Dr. Stevenson documented the shift carefully, noting how the twins' growing involvement in school friendships and the rituals of daily life seemed to overwrite the strange early behaviors. It was as though their young minds had briefly been vessels for something beyond themselves, something that had now moved on. For Florence, the change was bittersweet. On one hand, she was relieved that the eerie memories had faded and that her daughters could live normal lives. But a part of her also mourned the loss of what had felt like a final living connection to Joanna and Jacqueline. John's perspective was different. He believed the girls had returned to deliver a message that death was not the end, and now having fulfilled that purpose, they were free to live new lives. They came back to show us, he would say, and now they've moved on. From that point forward, Jillian and Jennifer grew up without incident. They thrived in school, developed unique personalities, and maintained a close bond, no longer defined by spiritual echoes, but by the love of ordinary sisters. Dr. Stevenson continued to follow their development for years. When he met with them as adults in their 20s, neither remembered anything from those early years. They were skeptical of the idea that they had ever claimed to be reincarnated. Yet something unexpected happened when Jillian turned 23. In 1981, she began experiencing vivid inner visions, mental images of playing in a garden with her brothers in a house she had never seen. She described the house and surrounding landscape in perfect detail. What stunned her parents and Dr. Stevenson was that her descriptions exactly matched their former home in Wickham, where Joanna had lived as a child. Jillian had never been there, not even once in her current life. The visions soon faded and never returned, but they left a lingering sense of mystery that even the family couldn't explain. Dr. Stevenson's research into the Robertson twins became one of his most famous and thoroughly documented cases. Over 30 separate behavioral, psychological, and physical correlations were recorded between the twins and their deceased sisters. His findings were published in academic journals and books like Children Who Remember Previous Lives and Reincarnation and Biology. What made the case so exceptional wasn't a single piece of evidence. It was the weight of all the evidence combined. Jennifer's birthmarks remained one of the most compelling elements. Blood tests confirmed the girls were monozygotic identical twins sharing the same DNA. Yet only Jennifer bore the scar-shaped mark on her forehead and the dark birthmark above her hip, both of which matched Jacqueline's injuries in location, shape, and texture. These physical anomalies were documented extensively through photographs and medical records. Dr. Stevenson's investigation included in-depth interviews, direct observation statements from independent witnesses, and medical documentation from both the twins and the deceased girls. Skeptics argued that John's belief in reincarnation might have influenced the twins through unconscious suggestion or projection. But Stevenson and others pointed out critical counter-arguments. Florence's early resistance to the idea, the highly specific nature of the girls' knowledge, the independent corroboration of their statements, and the fact that some of their behaviors and memories surfaced before they could have been influenced. While Stevenson remained cautious, he never claimed to have proven reincarnation definitively. Instead, he asserted that conventional scientific explanations failed to fully account for the case. The Robertson twins challenged assumptions about identity memory and the nature of human consciousness. Even today, the case continues to provoke debate among researchers, skeptics, and philosophers. What does it mean when identical twins, who should be physically indistinguishable, bear marks tied to someone else's injuries? How do children describe events from before they were born with such emotional weight and specificity? And more importantly, what are the limits of science when it comes to understanding the soul? For the Robertson family, these weren't abstract questions. They lived the answers every day. In their grief, they witnessed what seemed impossible. In their daughters, they saw life born from death, not metaphorically, but perhaps literally. Whether one believes in reincarnation or not, the case leaves behind a single haunting truth. Some stories refuse to end, even when the final chapter has been written. The Robertsons lived through experiences that shattered everything they thought they knew about life and death. Whether interpreted as proof of reincarnation, an extraordinary series of coincidences, or something even more elusive, their story remains one of the most thoroughly documented and mystifying cases in the history of anomalous phenomena. Florence Robertson, who passed away in 1979, never reached a clear resolution about what had happened to her family. In her final interviews, she admitted she still struggled with the religious implications of reincarnation, but she could not deny what she had seen with her own eyes. John Robertson, who died in 1985, held firm in his belief until the end his daughters had returned. For him, their brief window of remembering was a sacred gift, proof that love transcends death, and that families might be reunited beyond the limits of mortality. Today, Gillian and Jennifer Robertson lead quiet, conventional lives. They have families of their own, careers, and the everyday concerns of middle-aged women. They recall nothing of the years when they seemed to embody their deceased sisters, no memories, no sensations, no echoes of that eerie connection. Yet their story continues to resonate. Researchers, skeptics, and believers still point to their case as one of the most significant ever recorded in reincarnation research. Dr. Ian Stevenson's meticulous investigation of the Robertson twins remains a foundational study in the field. His work, published through the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, an institution he founded, continues to inspire and challenge researchers globally. What made the Robertson case stand out wasn't just its emotional weight, but its breadth of evidence. More than 30 distinct correlations were documented between the twins and their deceased sisters' behaviors, phobias, knowledge, and the now famous birthmarks. Blood tests in 1978 confirmed definitively what had long been presumed. Gillian and Jennifer were monozygotic twins, identical in every strand of DNA. This finding made Jennifer's unique birthmarks medically impossible by traditional science. Identical twins should by definition share the same genetic expressions. Yet Jennifer alone bore two distinctive marks, one matching a scar from Jacqueline's childhood accident, the other a birthmark perfectly aligned with a wound from the fatal car crash. These weren't vague similarities, they were nearly photographic matches documented in detail by Dr. Stevenson. But what he uncovered next made the case even more unsettling. In his broader research, Dr. Stevenson found that roughly 35% of the reincarnation cases he studied involved similar anomalies. Children born with birthmarks or deformities that matched wounds, scars, or injuries from the lives they claimed to remember. This phenomenon transcended borders, appearing in cultures that embraced reincarnation and those that did not. The children not only bore the marks of the dead, they often carried their knowledge as well, describing lives they could not have possibly experienced. The implications were staggering. If these weren't coincidences, then human consciousness might operate according to laws not yet understood. Memory, personality, even trauma. Could they persist across lifetimes? And if so, what does that mean for the boundaries we place between life and death? But perhaps the most disturbing revelations didn't come from the family, they came from Hexham itself. As Dr. Stevenson dug deeper, he discovered a quiet conspiracy of silence among the townspeople. Many residents had witnessed the twins exhibiting behaviors and knowledge they couldn't explain, but fear kept them quiet. Some described feeling profoundly unsettled around the girls in their early years, as though they were standing in the presence of something unnatural. Mrs. Elelanina Hartwell, the twins' former nursery school teacher, eventually admitted to Stevenson that Jennifer had once drawn shockingly detailed pictures of the fatal accident, accurate depictions of the car, the setting, and even the expression on the driver's face. She destroyed the drawings out of fear and guilt, never telling the Robertsons. "I didn't want to add to their burden," she said. But those drawings, they weren't imagined. They were drawn by someone who had been there. William Davies, The town's postman recalled overhearing the twins talk about people who had died before they were born, recounting personal details no child should know. They spoke of the dead like they were old friends, he told Stevenson, like they'd lived here before. By the end of his investigation, Stevenson understood that the Robertson twins case wasn't just about two girls. It was about a family, a town, and perhaps a much larger truth. A truth that continues to challenge everything we believe about memory, identity, and the soul. In the end, what do we make of stories like this? Are they proof of life after death? Echoes of unresolved trauma, or are they signs that our understanding of consciousness is still woefully incomplete? Whatever the answer, one fact remains. In the quiet English town of Hexham, two little girls came into the world, bearing the memories and the wounds of those who had come before. And that story refuses to be forgotten. The story of the Robertson twins was never just about two children. It was about an entire community silently grappling with an experience that defied logic. Their silence wasn't rooted in simple skepticism. It was rooted in fear. Fear of ridicule. Fear of confronting a reality they had no framework to understand. As Dr. Ian Stevenson's research deepened, he came to realize that the psychological toll extended far beyond the twins. What John Robertson had once welcomed as a spiritual gift had become for his family a long and living trauma. Florence Robertson's health had steadily deteriorated during the twins' early years. She suffered from chronic insomnia, bouts of severe anxiety, and extended periods of depression. Though medical records listed vague diagnoses and prescriptions for stress-related conditions, Florence rarely spoke openly about the true cause of her suffering. "How do you explain to a doctor that your children remember being murdered?" she once asked Dr. Stevenson. "How do you describe what it's like to see your dead daughters looking back at you through the eyes of their sisters?" The twins' older brothers were similarly caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. They had loved Joanna and Jacqueline deeply, and now saw unsettling glimpses of them in Gillian and Jennifer. What should have been a joyful bond became shadowed by confusion and grief. Some of the boys later admitted to recurring nightmares, dreams in which their sisters told them death wasn't permanent, that anyone could return. For children trying to understand mortality, the idea that death might not be final was not comforting, it was destabilizing. Even John, who had fervently prayed for proof of reincarnation, paid a price. His unwavering conviction, once a source of strength, isolated him from his community. Friends and neighbors began to keep their distance, whispering that he'd gone mad with grief. His small business suffered as customers grew uneasy around him. And eventually, the Catholic Church asked him not to return to services after he repeatedly contradicted doctrine during discussions of the soul resurrection and eternal life. "I got what I prayed for," John told Dr. Stevenson in 1982, 3 years before his death. "But I never realized that proof would be so terrifying to live with." Of all the evidence Dr. Stevenson collected, the birthmarks remained the most haunting. Jennifer's markings on her forehead and hip were physical impossibilities, according to modern science. Stevenson consulted geneticists, dermatologists, and embryologists, all of whom were struck by one glaring fact. Identical twins share the same DNA. They are biologically mirrors of one another. There should be no significant difference in birthmarks or scars. Dr. Margaret Fitzgerald, a prominent geneticist at Cambridge University, reviewed Stevenson's data and photographs. Her conclusion was blunt. Given that these twins are monozygotic, sharing identical DNA, the presence of distinctive birthmarks on only one child is medically unexplainable, using our current understanding of human development. But it wasn't just the existence of the birthmarks that baffled investigators. It was their behavior. Jennifer's mark on her forehead didn't just resemble Jacqueline's childhood scar. It acted like it. It darkened in cold weather, just as Jacqueline's had. Jennifer often experienced discomfort in the area without injury. And then there was her emotional reaction. As a young child, she would touch the mark and say things like, "It feels sad," or "It remembers being hurt," as though the skin itself carried memory. Stevenson would go on to document 14 other cases worldwide in which children bore birthmarks or deformities, precisely matching the injuries of deceased individuals whose lives they claimed to remember. These marks appeared in the same location with similar appearance and, in some cases, similar physical sensitivity. The evidence suggested something far more profound than coincidence. Whatever force might underlie reincarnation, if such a force exists, it appeared to carry more than memory or emotion. It carried trauma. It carried scars. To Dr. Stevenson, this possibility was staggering. If consciousness could survive death and be reborn into a new body, then it seemed that it also retained a kind of physical memory, traces of pain, injury, and emotional suffering etched not only into the psyche, but into the very flesh. The Robertson twins had lived as the epicenter of a mystery that science still struggles to explain. Their lives left behind not just a story, but a set of questions that continue to haunt our understanding of consciousness, identity, and the thin, trembling veil between life and death. Despite his international reputation as a pioneering researcher in the study of reincarnation, Dr. Ian Stevenson struggled privately with the implications of the Robertson case. After his death in 2007, his personal journals were made available to colleagues, revealing a scientist who was both deeply methodical and personally unsettled. In a 1979 entry, Stevenson wrote, "I cannot honestly say that I believe in reincarnation in the traditional sense, but I also cannot deny what I have documented. The Robertson twins, along with hundreds of other cases I have studied, present evidence that demands an explanation. If not reincarnation, then what?" Throughout his career, Dr. Stevenson considered several alternative theories to explain the phenomena he observed. Could the children's knowledge have been the result of telepathy? Could psychic phenomena be involved? Was it possible that some form of ancestral or genetic memory accounted for their behaviors? Or were these elaborate patterns the unconscious result of parental suggestion? Each possibility posed more questions than it answered. Telepathy could not account for Jennifer's birthmarks, tangible physical signs that matched scars from another life. Genetic memory failed to explain the specificity of conversations. Places and names the twins recalled details tied not to their ancestors, but to unrelated deceased siblings. Suggestion might have explained certain behaviors, but not the emotional authenticity, the spontaneous utterances, or the trauma-laden dreams that plagued the girls in their early years. In his later years, Stevenson shifted his focus. Rather than trying to prove reincarnation, he concentrated on documenting what he called anomalous phenomena. Experiences that pointed to gaps in our current scientific understanding of memory, identity, and consciousness. The Robertson twins remained one of his most important cases, precisely because it brought together multiple lines of evidence, physical markings, behavioral parallels, emotional responses, and eyewitness testimony. "Science advances by acknowledging what we cannot yet explain," he wrote in his final paper on the twins. "These children have shown us that there are aspects of human experience that our current paradigms cannot accommodate. Whether we call it reincarnation or something else entirely, we must remain open to the possibility that consciousness operates according to laws we have yet to discover." Today, the legacy of the Robertson case continues to ripple through research into human consciousness and survival after death. The University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, now led by Dr. Jim Tucker, builds upon Dr. Stevenson's work by investigating similar cases across the globe. Advances in technology, DNA testing, brain imaging, and sophisticated data modeling have allowed researchers to verify claims with a level of precision unavailable in Stevenson's time. Yet despite these tools, the core questions raised by the Robertson twins remain as unresolved and as unsettling as ever. Gillian and Jennifer Robertson, now in their 60s, live quiet lives far from the public eye. They have asked for privacy and have declined most interviews over the years. However, in 2010, Gillian offered a rare statement to researchers still studying their case. "I don't remember saying or doing those things," she admitted. "But I've seen the documentation. I've read what people said, and I can't explain it. I don't know how any of it could be true, but I also can't say it isn't." That quiet uncertainty has become the lasting echo of the Robertson twins story, a case that continues to blur the boundary between science and the supernatural, a mystery that refuses to be dismissed, and a reminder that the final word on life and what may come after has yet to be written. "I don't remember those early years," Gillian once said in a rare interview. "But I trust that my parents and Dr. Stevenson were honest in their reporting. Something happened to my sister and me. I don't know what it was, but it was real enough to affect our entire family." Jennifer has remained even more private. She rarely speaks about the case, but those close to her say she occasionally suffers vivid, unsettling dreams. Dreams that seem to come from a life she never lived. On more than one occasion, they've led her to seek counseling. She refuses to elaborate on the details. The Robertson twins case raises questions that reach far beyond one family's experience. If consciousness can survive death and return in a new form, what does that mean for our understanding of identity, memory, and what it means to be human? Are we singular, isolated minds, or something far more complex, something capable of spanning multiple lives, multiple bodies? Philosophers and theologians have wrestled with these questions for centuries. But cases like this take those abstract debates and drag them into the real world with medical records, photographs, behavioral evidence, and first-person testimony. If Gillian and Jennifer truly carried the memories of their deceased sisters, then who were they in those formative years? Were they Joanna and Jacqueline reborn, or entirely new individuals haunted by another life's unfinished story? This case also forces us to re-examine trauma healing and the body's strange ability to remember. If consciousness can carry physical scars from one life into the next, what are the implications for medicine and psychology? Could birthmarks, phobias, or unexplained pain be the echoes of something deeper, something ancient? For researchers like Dr. Stevenson, these questions remained unanswered but impossible to ignore. The Robertson case became a cornerstone of his work, not because it provided conclusions, but because it demanded better questions. And then there's the emotional core of it all, of family, connection. If we entertain even the possibility that Joanna and Jacqueline somehow returned as Gillian and Jennifer, then what does that say about the bonds between us? Perhaps love isn't bound by time. Perhaps grief doesn't have to end in silence. Perhaps the dead don't stay gone forever, not entirely. The twins' past life memories began to fade just before their 5th birthday, precisely the age Stevenson identified as the typical limit for such recall. It was as if something had passed through them, borrowed their voices, and then quietly departed. A final reunion before the veil closed again. Not a haunting, but a goodbye. For John and Florence Robertson, two parents broken by tragedy, it gave them something most grieving families never receive time. A brief, miraculous extension of love across the boundaries of death. Whether that was illusion or miracle remains unanswered. And maybe that's the point. The Robertson twins lived through something that challenged science, defied belief, and shattered the line between life and death. Their case remains a mystery, not because it lacks evidence, but because its evidence refuses to fit the world we think we know. So what do you believe? Was this the clearest proof we've ever seen that reincarnation is real? Or was it a perfect storm of trauma, psychology, and coincidence? Could there be even deeper mysteries, still buried in the quiet streets of Hexham, unspoken, unexplored? Let us know in the comments. Was everything revealed? Or is the truth still hiding in plain sight? If this story made you question reality, if it gave you chills, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone who craves the strange, the unexplained, the forgotten. Because sometimes, the truth really is stranger than we dare to imagine. We'll see you in the next episode where we explore another case that science still cannot explain.